Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Hi there. Um, Today, we're continuing with History of Horror, and we're going backwards, of course, as I do, and you're coming along with me. History of Horror, we're finished the 70s last time, so we're going back to the 60s. And I haven't really decided what order I'm going to do stuff in, so that's fine. I'll figure it out in about 3 seconds. I'll start with something. We are still focused mainly on Danse Macabre by Steven. The main bulk of his work was for the 50s, 60s, and 70s, with a little bit of going back to the 30s with that. Skipping over the 40s, because the 40s is weird. I'll talk about the 40s a bit, too. But yes, 60s. 60s where the seeds were sown that sprouted in the 70s and blossomed or bore fruit. I still like that analogy. Isn't that great? In the 80s. 50s as well. 50s is a good seed sowing time. Start with the 60s. For the most part, this is where the bulk of the television stuff is going to be. This is when TV horror really got going, and then it sort of died in the 70s because it started getting over-censored, I suppose. And it's come back in the 2000s with Supernatural and Walking Dead and all that sort of stuff. It's become less tame, which is good for society in general. But that's hot water. Alright. So I guess I'm starting with TV. TV is a good place to start. It started, Alfred Hitchcock Presents started in 55 and went on to 62. And then he had, Alfred Hitchcock, of course, had another show, the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, from 62 to 65. I guess that was the best starting point for horror. Then again, Mystery Playhouse with Boris Karloff started in 49, so it started earlier. But how many people actually had TVs in 49 as well? Oh, that really is good. But Thriller, DK's favorite. Here's Steve. Or how Steve looked in 80.
Thriller was Boris Karloff, and that started in 61 to 62. Going through it, we also have Outer Limits. That was 63 to 65. Twilight Zone was 59 to 64. So definitely the bulk of it in the 60s. And I mentioned Dark Shadows yesterday, and that was 66 to 71. Not really horror as such, but worth mentioning. These were collectively a great starting place for writers and directors and actors. Actors come and go out of the horror field, of course, but writers and directors tend to stick with it a lot. A lot of famous directors are going to be popping up here in the 60s for horror movies. Dario Argento is going to be starting in the late 60s. He's known for horror. But Dementia 13 is going to be in here, and that's Francis Ford Coppola's first movie. That's horror. Francis Ford Coppola is not known for his horror. Roman Polanski is sort of known for horror, but he's definitely known as a regular director. And he's got the first 3 films were horror-ish. But as far as TV goes, a lot of writers are going to be popping up over and over again. Richard Matheson, of course, did horror 60
20,000 feet, 30,000 feet, whatever the number of feet was. I have a bad memory for numbers. Which is, of course, the Twilight episode with William Shatner seeing the gremlin ripping the plane apart. Yes. Harlan Ellison, who we talked about yesterday, is going to be in a lot of these as well, Twilight Zones. I did I have a list? I made note of it, but I didn't write it down, so of course I forgot it since I've been making my notes. Ray Bradbury, of course, we're going to be talking about today as well. He's going to be in a lot of the Alfred Hitchcock stuff, the thriller stuff. I'm sure Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, he probably played around with those as well. When you go to, I went to IMDb. I'm getting all this information basically from IMDb. You can click on who are the authors of these, and you'll get like a list of like a page of authors, and you'll see a lot of names that you don't recognize, and you'll see a lot of names that you do recognize. If you're a fan of the genre, like Richard Matheson, Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison. These were the guys that were involved in these sort of things during that time. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, went further back to Ambrose Bierce times and W. Jacobs and stuff we're going to be talking about far later back. He did tend to do, I don't want to say classic stuff, but established writers. That's the point I was trying to make for next time. When I'm transferring to films, which I'm about to do. See, that was not a suave transition. Again, Stephen King's, I made a copy of Stephen King's, that one. Oh, for goodness sakes. I made a copy of Stephen King's Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, because he talks about the books and the movies, and he just lists them in chronological order for movies, in alphabetical order by author for books. And it makes things a little bit easier. For books, since I'm going chronologically, I had to go look up the dates. But it helps for the movies to have things in. Oh no, films was in he has the years on here, but it's in alphabetical by title, and it has a director on here. So I'm on yellow. Yellow is the 60s. Yellow highlighter for the 60s. So the directors and producers and stuff that you're going to be running into a lot. The big names. As Alfred Hitchcock was in this one, you'll see Alfred Hitchcock films in the 60s, like Psycho and The Birds. Which is 60 and 63, respectively. Correct? Correct. Dario Argento his first movie was 69 in here. I'm not sure if it was his first movie, but it's the first movie that Stephen King mentions. And I looked it up yesterday because I was talking about the 70s, and then I forgot about it. So, sorry. Francis Ford Coppola's Dementia 13 was 1963. Sort of Amityville-ish. Axe Murderer and Creepy Castle. Yeah. And Roman Polanski. Rosemary's Baby was 68. Repulsion was 65. And I have, not on his list, but on mine, The Fearless Vampire Killers was 67. This is Roman Polanski's beginnings. He started pretty much in the field. He went on and, of course, did drama afterwards. He came back to the field quite a few times. Ninth Gate, a few others. And of course, this is the Sharon Tate era as well. Sort of weird to talk about that one. But anyway. Oh, should I go and just order? No. Oh, so some other directors you probably should know. Roger Corman. A lot of Edgar Allan Poe stuff being put into film for the first couple of times. Like The Raven, Pit and the Pendulum, House of Usher. These are in the 60s. Did I have House of Usher in here? That's one that wasn't mentioned in here. These are Roger Corman. Roger Corman is still producing movies. He didn't. His last directing one was in 1990, and it was a Frankenstein-y thing, I think. But he's still directing movies. Like, he has stuff in pre-production, and on the IMDb list it has listed as pre-production. And you go down, it's like a page and 3 pages of scrolling, trying to go through all of his movies that he's produced on. Like Slumber Party Massacre? No, Sorority House Massacre. Slumber Party Massacre was another one. But, Roger Corman, he started in the 50s, so we're going to talk about him starting tomorrow. Let's see. Oh, and Night of the Living Dead, George Romero, 68. I've talked about that lots and lots and lots of times. It is one that, of course, King calls one of the mythic fairy tale horrors. In the section that I talked about yesterday, which I don't remember the page, 210. I bet you it was 210. Man, if I remember that, I'll be really impressed. It was 210. Hey. Psycho was also counting as mythic. Wait Until Dark. That's one that I sort of wouldn't call horror. It's Alan Arkin as the bad guy terrorizing... What's her name? That's a blind lady. Was it Audrey Hepburn, or was it the woman who drowned on the boat? Natalie Wood? No, it's Audrey Hepburn. I get those two confused. Don't ask me why. Audrey Hepburn as blind woman in Wait Until Dark. Yeah. That's 67. The Haunting is 63. That's sort of based on the Haunting of Hill House. Sort of. That's the one that was remade with Catherine Zeta-Jones in the 90s or 2000s. The Birds was 63. That counts as a fairy tale because it's birds under a magic spell that hurt people. Dementia 13 counts as a magic spell. I'll let it pass. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is on here as magic spell. Mythic fairy tale. Magic spell. Mythic fairy tale. That's a weird one. I guess he's still talking about subtext here, so I might just be missing it. It's a creepy horror movie, if you don't have a monster. So Noel Carroll wouldn't call it a horror movie, but everybody else seems to think it's a horror movie. And X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes. I think that was a Roger Corman too, wasn't it? Who was that? That was Roger Corman as well. Along with The Tomb of Ligeia is another one he mentions on here, which is King likes talking about the man with the X-ray eyes. It's about a guy who puts eye drops in that he created in the lab, and he's go to Vegas and see cards in the people's hands, and he can look up women's skirts or look through women's skirts or whatever, and then things get worse, as they do in horror movies. 1, 2, 3, Dementia 13, Birds, Night of the Living Dead, Haunting, Psycho, Wait Until Dark. Alright, that's that from that list. I guess that's that. Okay. I didn't need that. Alright. Oh yeah, I did want to go... I'll just go over the list real quick. It's the yellow highlights on here, so... The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock, 1963. It's, of course, what I've talked about it in Massification. A swarm of birds that wouldn't usually work together in diabolical means, making them a monster in Noel Carroll's eyes. Try not to talk too fast. I'll work on that. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is Dario Argento's first work. Black Sunday popped up a few times. Mario Bava. I'm not familiar with this one at all. Steam. That's the second time I've done that. I've contracted in my brain Stephen King into Sting. Or into my mouth. My mouth contracted it. Stephen King puts Black Sunday with an asterisk, meaning it's important for horror viewers. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with it, so I'll pass that one on to you guys. Burn Witch Burn, Sidney Hayers, 1962. The Cage, Walter Grauman. One I'm not familiar with at all. Burn Witch Burn was a man catches his wife, or his wife sort of doing witchcraft and marital things. Yeah. The Cage, Walter Grauman, I haven't seen. I'm not familiar with. But it's also got an asterisk next to it, meaning Stephen King thinks it's important. The Conqueror Worm, Michael Reeves, 1968. I have no idea. The Day of the Triffids. I've heard about this one a lot, but I have not seen it. 63. And Steve Seekley. The Deadly Bees, Freddie Francis, 1967. Dementia 13, I mentioned. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, Freddie Francis. Who's Freddie Francis? That's 2 almost in a row. See if any more of his pop up. Well, this is also the end of Ingmar Bergman's career-ish. Well, I guess he went a little bit further, but there's a few of them in here as Ingmar. But some of them are from the 50s, so we'll probably talk about some of them tomorrow. The Exterminating Angel, Louis Buñuel, 1963. Eye of the Cat, David Lowell Rich, 1969. That's made it onto quite a few of the lists that I talked about. Yeah, I'll deal with those. Gorgo, Eugene Laurie, 1961. The Haunting, Robert Wise, 1963. The Hour of the Wolf, that's the Ingmar Bergman. And that looked really good. Ingmar Bergman's very, very influential. Swedish? Was he Swedish? He's one of the super directors, like when someone talks about how great directors are and they like go on and on, they try and act pretentious, they really mention Bergman a lot. And he's a good director. I'm not denying that, but I guess I don't see the finer points of direction when I'm watching a movie. A lot of this stuff is pretty heavy, and you have to get into that. In a philosophy, when I was in college, I went to a philosophy thing, and we actually watched a Bergman movie, and it was really dense and tough to get into, but good critique of religion sort of thing, and there's odd stuff going on. That's the one where the woman sleeps with his brother, waiting for God to come through the wall, and then a giant spider comes through the wall. In her mind, she's going insane. Yeah. Anyway, I don't remember the name of that one. We'll see. Anyway. Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Robert Aldrich, 1965. This one pops up on pretty much all the lists, and I'm sorry to say that I don't know it. I Saw What You Did, William Castle. William Castle pops up quite a bit, too. 1965. Last Summer, Frank Perry, 1969. Mask of the Red Death, that's a Roger Corman, 1964. Night Must Fall, Carol Reese. I'm going to pronounce that wrong, I apologize. 64. There's Night of the Living Dead. There's good old George. Starting his career. I guess Martin's not on this one. I guess Martin was in 77, so no, that would be later. Did I talk about Martin yesterday? I think I did. I hope I did. Yeah, I did. No Way to Treat a Lady, Jack Smite, 1968. Panic in the Year Zero, Ray Milland, 1962. Another Corman, Pit and the Pendulum, 1961. Psycho, Hitchcock, of course, 60, of course. Talked about that a few times. Oh, Rosemary's Baby, and we're going to talk about this in the book form, because King talks about it at some length in the book form, and I'm trying to keep the novels going. Yeah, Rosemary's Baby is Polanski. Did I say Repulsion? Repulsion's Polanski in 65. Rosemary's Baby is Polanski in 68. Good movie. I remember watching it with my friend, so we were actually making fun of some of the odd acting practices that were going on in there. But for the most part, good movie, kind of creepy. Better book. And whatever you do, don't read the sequel. It's awful. Son of Rosemary. It is really the worst book I've ever read. It's just awful. Oh yes, so Seance on a Wet Afternoon, by Brian Forbes, 1964. Straight Jacket, William Castle, 1964. Suddenly Last Summer, Joseph L. Mankiewicz, 1960. Tomb of Ligeia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's a Roger Corman, and that's 65. Village of the Damned, the original. Wolf-Rilla, 1960. That was remade in the 90s, late 90s. Probably one of the first remakes, because when I talked about this 2000s being very remake heavy, yeah, the 2000s were very remake heavy. And I think it probably started, because I think the Village of the Damned remake was in the late 90s or mid 90s. Might be one of the first of the remake not genre, but remake trend. Wait Until Dark, I mentioned before, the Alan Arkin. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, I mentioned before. That was Betty Davis and... what's her name? I didn't... If you haven't seen that one, you should definitely go see that one. It's just spooky. Not really horror, according to Carol, but according to everybody else it is. Next, The Man with the Red X-Ray Eyes. I mentioned that one as well. The ones not on Stephen King's list that seem to be on everybody else's list, because I went on IMDb and checked out the couple of lists of best horror 60s horror films. Eyes Without a Face seem to be on all of them, and it's not one I'm not familiar with. Peeping Tom seemed to be on 2/3 of them. Carnival of Souls seemed to be on a few as well. There's two from Japan, Onibaba, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, and Kwaidan, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, both in 1964. I'm probably going to try to research them a bit more and go back to it when I talk about anthropology, differences in cultures in horror, and similarities in cultures in horror. Fearless Vampire Killers didn't make onto King's list, but it's 67. It's Polanski again. And I think that Sharon Tate was in that one too. Yes, she was. Oh, and Hammer starts. Didn't start. This is Hammer Comes to America. I think he probably did earlier, but the ones that modern kids of the 80s like myself, or kids in the 90s like myself, when they think Hammer films, they think Christopher Lee Hammer films, and they think, Dracula. And this is that era. The Brides of Dracula was 60. Dracula Prince of Darkness, which is the Christopher Lee one, 66. Curse of the Werewolf, 61. The Gorgon, 64. I went to the Hammer filmography, and they actually started in the 30s, and then they did a lot of like noir stuff or detective stuff in the 20s, 30s, starting with the horror-ish stuff in the 50s, the ones that King likes so much, the Creeping Unknown and the Quatermass, which I'm going to talk about some more tomorrow because King likes it a lot, and I'm so focused on that, which I didn't realize were Hammer movies until I went onto the site. So the Hammer films, the big Hammer werewolf, mummy, Dracula stuff will be, Frankenstein would be the 60s. A few more that I talked about, 1966, The Reptile. I talked about that earlier when I was talking about fusion monsters. Man, or rather woman, reptile, fuse them together, you get the reptile as a monster. The Innocents, I talked about when I was talking about the Fantastic. It is based on Turn of the Screw. And it kept the fantastic element. It tried to keep the fantastic element. The fantastic hesitation. That's the term I was after. Before I go on to that, I wanted to mention that last time I had this slide up, I didn't have the notes on the Production Code of America. This is also known as the Hays Code. The original one that I got from Josh Howard said it ended in 64. It actually didn't end until 68, but it was certainly not as effective after 64. And the court cases that were in the 50s that ended it even more. That were the nails in the coffin of it, the first nails in the coffin. The Production Code of America, also known as the Hays Code, was the censorship, the policing of movies by the industry and by law, as well. They had to go through the New York board, the MPAA ratings. MPAA ratings weren't there yet. The PG, G, R, NC-17 as it is now. PG-13s, etc. Um, they weren't. They started in 1968 and replaced this Hays Code, the production code. Um, when it ended, it allowed more graphicness in the movies. Before it ended, you had to fake it, or have your movie be produced outside the country, which did a lot more to end the code than anything else, because imports and whatever couldn't be censored because they weren't, it was imported. There was different laws for that sort of stuff. I think it's been changed since then, but then again, in the 1968, they just rated the code. They didn't actually take things out. The Production Code of America was what you couldn't make in the movies. I went over it today. You couldn't be critical of religion. You couldn't have whites and blacks in relationships. Miscegenation? Miscegenation? That's one word I can never pronounce. Miscegenation. That's wrong. Apologies. You had to be careful about how you portrayed the flag. You had to be careful about how you portrayed other countries, etc., etc. It went on and on and on. No sex, no views of prostitution, no white slavery. They didn't say anything about you can't portray black slavery. No torture, no yada yada yada. So once that code died, the doors opened and it's like, oh, we'll just take an R rating and show what we want to show, or we'll take an NC or X rating and show what we want to show. Of course, they made it more difficult to show the movies with the ratings, but you could show the movies if you had a theater that was willing to do it. Excuse me. Now, I will mention this. If you see the movie Hitchcock, with both actors' names have flown out of my mind. Anthony Hopkins plays Alfred Hitchcock. Helen Mirren plays Alfred Hitchcock's wife. And quite a few other people are in there that are worthy of note, but I can't remember them. It came out last year, I believe. It was about the making of Psycho, and they do talk about the guy. The censor comes in and says, you can't show this, the shower scene. The shower scene in Psycho does not show anything. If you think you're seeing it, you're not. It's your imagination takes over. But Hitchcock hated the code, and he bent it or twisted it in as many ways as possible. On the Wikipedia website about the Production Code of America, the Hays Code, one of the things was you couldn't kiss for longer than 3 seconds. So Alfred Hitchcock, in a kissing scene in the 50s, had the two actors, one pair of lips here, one pair of lips here, talking for a second or two, kissing for 3 seconds, talking for another second or two, kissing for 3 seconds. So it's a big makeout session. I think he said up to 10 minutes or something, or 8 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, I don't remember, but whatever it said. But he beat the system by bending the rules. They weren't actually kissing for more than 3 seconds at a time. Their mouths were right next to each other, and they were talking for a second, and then they kissed again. So the production code obviously was fought by Alfred Hitchcock. And in the movie Hitchcock, they talk about even the censor was convinced that he saw the knife going into the actress, which it did not, obviously, because the actress was alive after the movie was finished. Yeah. So, of course, that was 1960 when Psycho was made. 68 is when the code finally fell, and it was falling apart as early as 64, as Josh Howard calls it. Was this? Armageddon religious horror continued in the 60s. Most of the ones that I saw didn't really focus on Armageddon or religious horror. I guess Armageddon being stuff like the sequels of Godzilla, that kind of Armageddon. Religion, Rosemary's Baby, if you're counting that. I don't know. That's sort of. I have issue with Josh Howard on that one, Mr. Howard. Of course, we go back. I'm going to try to keep the slide for the 50s because we're talking about the 60s today, but this is also from Josh Howard. The 50s and 60s Hammer films, getting into the big stuff. There's a 50s-60s division between Armageddon and demonic horror. I'm skipping over that one because it confuses me. I will go on to books now. Did I miss one? Yes, I did. Where a lot of the 70s authors were cutting their teeth making TV shows. Like Harlan Ellison and Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson also started in the 50s with a lot of stuff, with Twilight Zone, etc. But he did release books in this time too. The two that King wants to talk about in his novels section, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Ray Bradbury, the 62. It's the sort of childhoody, Harper Lee-esque looking at childhood, but rational look at childhood, not rose-colored glasses look at childhood. Something Wicked This Way Comes. Two buddies, friends. The carnival comes into town. The carnival has an evil element to it. People start disappearing or becoming kids or whatnot. Stuff going on. It's Ray Bradbury. You guys should know Ray Bradbury by now. Of course, he started in the 50s as well. So, and this one's only 62. So he's a 50s, 60s type guy. Early 60s. And of course, Ray Bradbury went on to do stuff up until he died, which was last year? Maybe the year before? I've lost my train of thought. Oh, so the carnival, Dark Carnival, not Dark Carnival, but a carnival that's evil, and what the kids get up to, and what the adults get up to, what the parents get up to. Horror, creepy, not horror. Fantastic, not fantastic. Fantasy. Fantasy horror, I guess. Yeah, I guess it is. I'm not sure where to put Something Wicked. King raves about it. It's not bad, definitely, but I'm not sure where to put it. I'm getting it confused. Yeah, I'm just getting it confused. Like, because people steal the ideas from Something Wicked and turn it into other movies, and I've seen those other movies, and I'm implying those movies are imposing my view of Something Wicked, which is weird. Yeah, it's weird. Sorry, and it's late as well. Um, the other one that he really talks about, I'm more familiar with. I know better, and I'm less confused about. Is Rosemary's Baby. This was his transition from The Bad Place into other horror stuff. This is urban paranoia, which he contradicts with. No, not contradicts. Oh my! This last 5 minutes, I got nothing. Whew. Alright, deep breath. Just take a drink of water. I'm going to start again. Well, no, I'm not, but... Okay. Rosemary's Baby is urban paranoia in the same way that the Body Snatchers... Finney is Jack Finney's Body Snatchers is rural or suburban paranoia. Yeah. Compares. I think that's the word I was after. Why am I don't know. Anyway, Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary, of course, don't read the sequel. Rosemary is impregnated with Satan's child, while drunk and probably drugged by her husband and the Satanist club. And her pregnancy is basically the bulk of the book. She is manipulated by the Satanist group in ways to get them to have the Satanist doctor be her obstetrician as opposed to the good doctor, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, you guys got the gist of Rosemary's Baby. And then, of course, at the end, the baby's born. And now my perception of it is being influenced by what I've read in the Son of Rosemary, which you shouldn't read. It's just awful. God. I'm such hating on IR11 now. I shouldn't be. Just skip that book. Rosemary's Baby is great. Read it. It's really good. Stepford Wives. Read it. It's good. Just don't read the sequel. Anyway, I'm going to go over the other 60s books on his list here. This is in alphabetical order by author. And most of these I have not read. Charles Beaumont, Hunger and Magic Man, 64. Roger Bloch, Psycho was in 59. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Pleasant Dreams, Asterisk, was in 60. So, Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Frederick Brown, Nightmares, and Geisenstacks. I have no idea what that's about, but Geisenstacks is my new favorite word. That's a 61. Roald Dahl, Kiss Kiss, was 60. Roald Dahl making his appearance on the list on this show. Most people know him nowadays for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but he was a very not weird author in the same sense that Lovecraft was a weird author. He's a weird author as we would know him. He's kind of weird. Stuff is odd. Jack Finney, I Love Galesburg in Springtime was 63. We'll talk about more Jack Finney tomorrow. Jack Finney from last time was Time and Again. Davis Grubb, 12 Tales of Horror, 64. I'm assuming there's 12 Tales of Horror. I don't really know them. But that's Asterix as well. So Jerry Kosinski, The Painted Bird. Was that? Out of curiosity. No, it's not. I was checking to see if that was the first Dario Argento movie, but that was Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I was seeing if I just discovered something, but I hadn't. Richard Matheson's on this list with Shock 2. Oh, Rosemary's Baby, which I mentioned, of course. Which was 64. Richard Matheson's Shock 2, 64. Thomas Pynchon V is 63. It's one I'm familiar with. I did not realize it was horror. I still don't think it is. I think Stephen King's telling tales out of school. Well, that's not the right invective, is it? I haven't read the book, so Stephen King knows better than I do, so I'll skip it. But I did not realize that was horror. When I worked in the bookstore, a lot of people bought that, but not one I'm familiar with, so I'm skipping. Ray Russell, Sardonicus, 61. I don't know it. Theodore Surgeon, Some of Your Blood, 61. I guess we're going to talk more about... Well, no, that's the one that's asterisked for Theodore Surgeon. Leslie Whitten, Progeny of the Adder, 65. I talked about Leslie Whitten in the werewolf one for... Moon of the Wolf, which Stephen King made fun of in his werewolf section of the movie. The movie was awful. Geoffrey Lewis was in the movie. And the movie could have been so much better if they just didn't do what they did to it. Acting was great. Jeffrey Lewis, Jeffrey. He's great. I have no issue with him. He's been in some great, awful horror movies. But it was just not a good movie. But it was a good book, and that was also Leslie Whitten. I don't think Stephen King had a problem with the book Moon of the Wolf if you read it. But the book was very good, actually. I think it was... I don't know if it was the 60s, though. It might be the 70s. But Progeny of the Adder was 65. And that's... I think that's what I've got. I didn't have horror subtext section for the 60s because the ones that he mentions aren't from the 60s. He had a number from the 70s and a number from the 50s, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But none of the examples that he had fell into the 60s for some reason. And I can't pick up on subtext. It's hints that I'm not getting. So, my apologies if you're screaming at the screen. Sorry. So that's 48 minutes. I think that's pretty good. Next time, what we're going to be looking out for, well, this is the last of the history of horror from Josh Howard's side of things, besides what he talks about for books, which isn't much. So I'm basically, once I'm done with that, I'm going to be going on to Lovecraft's supernatural horror and literature. And he does a lot of history. But the bulk of that is history, which is helpful. Because Stephen King's going to be winding down, and I'm not really going to know where to go after that. It's going to be a little bit more freeform. I'm going to use... He goes in chronological order, so I'm going to use his examples. So I won't be going by decade by decade. I'll be talking about things like... The Modern Masters is what he calls his last chapter. And the weird tradition in the British Isles, and then the weird tradition in America, and the weird tradition on the continent. Poe is going to have his own section because Poe has his own section in here. And then the pre-Poes and the post-Poes and the aftermath of Gothic fiction, the apex of Gothic romance, the early Gothic novel, blah 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 blah. We're going to get into that when we get into that. But for the most part, I'll be jumping onto him once I'm done with King. King will talk about the 30s and stuff, and then pretty much peters out. So I might have to do a little bit of research between 30s and... Well, 40s is going to be rough anyway, because the war was going on. There was not a whole heck of a lot in the 40s as far as horror went, even on radio, even in the beginnings of television. Like 49 was when I said that Mystery Playhouse with Boris Karloff began. So yeah, that's 49 is basically just post-war. But we'll talk about the 50s tomorrow. We'll talk about what I can in the 40s, and I think that might be just a short video on the 40s on the next day. I'm probably going to go back and do research and catch-up videos that I had for this thing, because I still haven't done the earlier videos with good sound. So, that's that, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue with History of Horror tomorrow. Finishing up with the bulk of King. Tomorrow as well. Then we're going to go over little details as well the next day. For Horror Analysis, this is Drew. I'm going to talk to you all later.